Welcome, bonjour, bienvenue. Thank you for joining us today for our peer learning group on Innovating for Impact, Evaluation and Learning in Canada Skills Ecosystem. We're going to get started in just a few moments. And so as people are settling in, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. My name is Sandy Chan from Research Impact Canada. I'm joined today by my colleague, Connie Tang, by our partners at the Future Skills Center, and presenter Marshal Rodrigues from Blueprint. If this is your first time joining us for a peer learning group, I will provide an overview of the session. So essentially, the goal of the peer learning groups is to facilitate conversations around discussion topic. Today's presentation will set the context, but the majority of these next 90 minutes will be focused on giving you the opportunity to share your insights and experiences. And so before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from York University, which is on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. As we are gathered virtually, I encourage you to reflect on and acknowledge the land that you're joining us from. Now, there are just a few housekeeping items to bring your attention to. The first is that we invite you to participate in the chat throughout the session. Closed captioning is available for the session as well, and it can be activated by clicking the icon in the Zoom toolbar. We also have interpretation available for today's session. If you'd like to participate in French, you can choose the settings below by clicking on the globe icon in the toolbar. And after the presentation, we will be going into a facilitated discussion where we invite you to share your insights and experiences. The breakout rooms will not be recorded. However, we will be recording the primer presentation so that you can refer back to it later on. So today we will discuss myths and misconceptions about evaluation, and we will showcase practical evaluation tools and resources that you can use in your day-to-day work. We also invite you to share your initiatives at your own organizations where you have successfully conducted evidence generation in the skills and workforce development sector. We encourage you to talk about your experiences, to connect with others, and share best practices and tools. And so here is an overview of the next 90 minutes. In a moment, I will turn it over to Marshal Rodrigues, Associate Director from Blueprint. And then after her presentation, we will then be going into breakout rooms for 30 minutes. And at the end, we'll come back for a summary led by our facilitators. Now, just before we do that, we just want to give you a quick preview of the discussion question that will happen in the breakout rooms. And the question that we want you to keep in mind as you're listening to Marshal's presentation is, how can we right-size our evaluation to our initiatives? What tools and strategies have you used that you have found to be useful? So to help them empower young people and prepare them for the future of work. So I encourage you to keep this in mind as you're listening to the presentation. And now I will turn it over to Marshall.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Sandy. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. It's lovely to have so many people here passionate or excited to learn or talk and share insights on evaluation. Just going to share my screen and we'll get started. So as Sandy had mentioned, my name is Marshal Rodrigues. I'm a credential evaluator and an associate director at Blueprint. I've been in this space for over a decade, really looking at how we can better tell our stories and collect evidence and information to really support our policy work, especially connected to skills training. For those of you who aren't familiar, Blueprint is a nonprofit organization based in Toronto with staff across Canada, founded 8 years ago on the simple idea that evidence is a powerful tool for change. And we really use that vision through all of our work as we support government, founders, nonprofits, community organizations, municipalities, to really think critically about how can we create processes and systems to better capture that evidence from individuals who are directly receiving services, who are receiving those supports, or in the ecosystem to better improve our programming. We really focus in areas related to employment, economic integration, income security, children, youth, families and communities, housing, and community safety and justice. That's just a little bit about me, but I want to get a little bit to know about you and everyone who's here today. So in relation of a peer learning group, I'm going to learn about a new platform. So we've got a form survey here, just a quick poll to see what people's comfortability is with evaluations. If you wouldn't mind holding up your phone, scanning the QR code, or there is the link there as well too. I'm just interested to see kind of where do you fit along the scale. So we've got our one on it of I've never done evaluation, I don't really know anything about it. the 5 that I a little bit, I supported to some extent. And it's kind of, this is my bread and butter. I do it all the time. So starting to get the numbers come in as well. So this is great. A little bit longer to see where we're kind of sitting at. Okay. So as you can see from our little visualization on our screen, we've got great variety.
Sorry, Marshall, I don't mean to interrupt. Your microphone seems to be cutting off. Maybe if you could bring it closer to you.
I'm gonna lean in. Is this
Oh,
better?
perfect. Yes.
Okay.
Amazing. Thank
I'm
you.
gonna have a nice little lunch for our presentation. Hopefully this is better for everyone. But what we can see from our screen now, we've got a variety of people's experience and knowledge. It's great just to see our numbers shifting, and so hopefully some great conversations today. The focus of today's presentation is really to myth bust and to talk through some of the ideas or stories or feedback I've heard throughout my career and with peers to showcase that, you know, evaluation and evidence generation maybe isn't as scary or a thought off process, and that really it is something that even to a small extent you can integrate into your work. So our first myth today that we're going to bust is that I'm not an evaluator. I can't do evaluation-y things. This is one of my favorite to kind of start those conversations with individuals, as it's often seen to be something a little bit further away from what they can do, and something that individuals really kind of stay in their lane or their silo, thinking that my job is only to look at program design or implementation or service delivery. But really what I'm challenging us all today is that we can make small changes in relationship to evaluation. Many of the skill sets that you use in your day-to-day work, whether that be project management, communication, interpersonal skills, adaptability, you know, a lot of us are experts in that adaptability, especially over the last couple of years. Those are all skills that we use as an evaluator to be able to work through projects. And so it's really, you already have a lot of these core skills. It's just how we apply them in our work. And when I talk to individuals, especially when I talk to like cousins or nieces around what my work is, you know, I always kind of go back to, I have the privilege of asking why. My entire job is just to be that person to going, why do you think that happened? Why do you think this comes because of that? Why do you think this program is working? And by unpacking that why, we're able to figure out key metrics or ideas that we can start to explore and to understand and collect information on to improve their programming. So if there's nothing else you take from today, I really encourage and challenge you all to think more about why things are happening in the work that you do and look to find solutions to help to address those. Our second myth for today is that evaluations only look at outcomes. And I really believe that this myth is often driven by our funders and our accountabilities, where we're required to map these out and tell stories around how many people, you know, got better housing or things like that, but it's only one piece of our story in actuality. And one of the frameworks that I really rely on in my work is from OECD. And they've mapped out this beautiful framework that you can see on the screen, everything from relevance to sustainability. And so I encourage you to think a bit more expansively when we talk about evaluations. You need to consider, is this intervention relevant to the people that we're supporting? Is it actually meaningful for youth that we're supposed to be helping? How does it fit within potentially the services your organizations offer, the services in your community? Does it make sense in part of its effort? Our effectiveness is really where we still look at outcomes and not say those aren't important, and we want to make sure that those are built in, but we also want to look at efficiency. And that's also kind of a key area, especially when we think about our value for money and our cost to deliver, or also like those lean principles. Are we creating undue burden or expectations to have things happen, like a intensive enrollment period? Is there ways we can streamline that to make it happen a bit more efficiently? Impact is kind of that ultimate goal of what is that difference the intervention is making at often a more larger scale. And we'll actually get back to this one later in the slide deck. And then finally, sustainability, especially when we think about pilot project funding. So those 1 to 3 year funding systems that we get from often government organizations. How can we build some sustainability into that so that we can continue to deliver these services whether it's through finding other funding sources, bringing into core programming, changing the funding model. So now there's a paid for service model. So as you can see, there's a lot more ideas that we need to unpack when we think about evaluations. And so start thinking a little bit more expansively to it. Myth 3 is my personal beef. So often we get called in at the end of a project when the funder is asking for a final report about what happened, and there hasn't been that thought about evaluation or bringing some of those initial why questions into our work. And it just makes things a little bit more challenging when we only think about it at the end. I'm seeing in the chat already, Heather is feeling that as well. And I think part of that actually comes from when we look at the definition of the word. So evaluation is the process of assessing merit of something. And so we often think about that as the end of something. And that's where I'm going to challenge everyone to think maybe a bit more expansively, and where we at Blueprint have really used the word evidence generation. And that, by definition, is the process of creating data to support a claim. And so this allows you to think a little bit more broadly around what are we trying to understand? What is this claim or idea that we're supporting? And now it's not only something we're assessing merit, but we're trying to learn information to support a hypothesis, an idea, or information. And to do this at Blueprint, we've kind of leveraged other sectors and brought in the innovation cycle. So just like what tech organizations do, or consumer products when they're making a new, I don't know, Kit Kat bar or, you know, Reese's Pieces, I think there's so many different iterations of it. They often try to think through this, you know, what's the issue we're trying to resolve? How might we address this? And then to work to building a model that we can eventually scale. And it's through thinking through what stage are we really at, we're able to be more intentional in what data we're collecting and what is the best utilization of our resources and our dollars and our time. And because of that, and for those who attended workshop last week, we've built our evidence framework. So this is a super high level of what is included as part of it, but we've really been intentional at Blueprint to figure out what information and what questions do we need to answer at each stage of our work. And that allows us to work with our partners, to even work internally when we're doing innovative work, to be able to, one, not have high expectations that are unrealistic to meet, but that we're making sure we're building that evidence and that justification so that when we get to that scaling stage or when we want to do that impact evaluation, we have sufficient data and stories to be able to tell. And that if not, we're iterating as we go, which is also so important. We're not just waiting to the end to make changes. Myth 4 is something I'm hearing a little bit more in the ecosystem, kind of leverages a little bit on myth 2 and 3, but there seems to be a greater drive on this impact evaluation. And impact evaluation is where we really talk about what is this program doing, what is the role and what is kind of causing into the ecosystem. And I've had some clients or some individuals that I work with that really highlight that that is all they want to do and blinders on. And while it's great and it allows you the ability to do you know, ROIs, return on investments, or social return on investments, you have a bit more of a wider reach, or randomized control studies, which really helps to build that evidence base, it's not always the best path forward. And I've really enjoyed Stanford Social Innovation Review. Once you get the slides, there's a link to an article there, but they just highlight society's kind of view of our over-reliance on our impact evaluation that results in ineffective use of time and money and often inflated results. I don't know how many are within the evaluation sphere or have read social return on investment reports, and numbers like $1 spent equals like an $800 return or some very vast numbers. You can just see some of that inflated results as part of it. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. They're really beneficial. And if you have a really stable product or project and some clear benefits of doing this work and the resources and time to do it, that's absolutely great and strongly encourage you to do it. But if you're not there yet, just creating a culture around data and creating a culture around asking why and how do we know is more important in my perspective for the long term. So I encourage you to go back to your organizations and look to say, are we regularly collecting this data? Are we actually analyzing and using this data? That's often the hard part. Many times I go and work with an organization, they're like, we have all of this data, but we don't know what it says or what it means in our context. And so creating that systems and processes can have a bigger impact than doing a one-time ill-fit impact evaluation. That being said, there is a website linked here if you do think you're in the right place to do an impact evaluation, so please do check that out. And finally, the last myth we're here to bust today is around resources. Evaluation is definitely a sector and field where there's a lot of semantics to it. We can call things a summative and formative. We can call it a process and an outcome. We use a lot of different terminologies and words that sometimes make it challenging or hard to engage in, especially if you're not familiar on some of these nuances and differences. So what I've tried to do is pick a couple of resources that are my favorite to give you a place to start. So Project Evidence, the first one on the slide, this is a US organization founded in 2017. They focus on modernizing, humanizing, and scaling how evidence is built and worked. So they're really a forward thinker organization, and an organization that actually we at Blueprint look to when we're needing new ideas or some expansive thoughts of how we approach evaluation. So if you're a little bit more experienced, I encourage you to explore more broadly on their website. If you're a little bit newer to this work, the Beginner's Guide is a great place to start. The next one we have on the list is from Better Evaluation. So they're established by the Global Evaluation Institute, which is focused on governments, supporting governments and improving monitoring, evaluation, and use of evidence in their country. So again, their scope is quite large, but they've got a really tangible manager's guide. So if you're thinking about your skills and development programming, here's a manager's approach of how you can start to think evaluation and implement it into your work. And then finally on here, the Knowledge Institute on Children and Youth Mental Health and Addiction. This is a Canadian organization based in Ottawa. And while I know the scope of it maybe doesn't align with a lot of us in terms of the skills and training, the organization really focuses on accelerating system change, mobilizing evidence, and strengthening knowledge and skills. And so I find this toolkit really expansive and looks at some great methodologies and approaches that can be applied in a bit more of a skills and training environment. So again, if you're a little bit newer to the space, maybe stick to these links here. If you're a bit more experienced, explore the sites. I find there's so many great resources to be able to look at and learn from. And with that, thank you so much for joining my conversation at the beginning. I hope this has at least spurred some ideas or at least validated, as I can see in the chat, some of the experiences that you've had. I've also included my email on here. Feel free to reach out. I love just connecting with others and having further conversations just around your own challenges or expansive thinking as part of it. And with that, I will pass it back over to Sandy.